And so now it is my distinct honor to introduce Christian Schöne, who's the Marcia and Oded Borowski and George A. Barton Research Fellow here at the Albright this spring, 2025. Christian's a PhD candidate at the University of Cologne at the Archaeology Institute there. And Christian has focused his research on methods of archaeological fieldwork, and he's participated in many archaeological excavations throughout the Mediterranean, most of all at the remarkable site of Elusa and its hinterland. Christian's completing a dissertation on this remarkable site and its economic history and its settlement patterns. And I'll leave it to Christian to say more about this site, why it's so special. He's served as the head excavator at the Cologne excavations there since 2017. I'll just add one note, which is that in 2023, he discovered a near complete 7-line Greek inscription from the mid-4th century from this site, which is truly a rare feat for a researcher and so I'm delighted to introduce you. Thanks for sharing your work with us, Christian. Please join me in welcoming Christian Schöne.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and I would also like to thank for both the opportunity to speak today and for the amazing chance to be a fellow at this illustrious institute. I'm really very glad to be here. During my first time in Israel in 2013, I was coming here already fascinated by desert archaeology and felt very lucky to be chosen to come here as a young student. And that was just luck because I knew how our surveying equipment and geophysical equipment worked well. And at this moment, I could have never dreamed or thought about working here for many years and finally doing my PhD on a topic of the region. My lecture will be divided in 2 parts. I will give a quick introduction into Elusa and the findings of the urban project to give you a baseline and something to compare later on with the hinterland survey, which will be the second part of my lecture, and is more about my PhD project. I'm using the Greek name Elusa, but the city is also often called with its Hebrew name Haluza, or its Arabic name Khalaza. I hope I pronounce it relatively okay, but well, here we go. First of all, I would like to give a quick localization. Elusa is today in the south of modern Israel, located about 45 kilometers from the Mediterranean coast and 30 kilometers from the modern border to Egypt. The next modern large city is Beersheba, about 15 kilometers to its northeast. It therefore lies in the Negev. Sometimes the area is called Northern Negev, sometimes it's called Western Negev, and I even read somebody calling it Southern Negev. I don't really know, but for sure it's an area with low amount of rainfall throughout the year. For example, nearby weather station of the Israel Meteorological Service at Revivim, about 10 kilometers from the site, gives an average rainfall of about 107 millimeter for the current age, with some years as low as 32 millimeters of rainfall. The ancient settlement was therefore located on the fringe between the arid zone and the hyper-arid part lower in the south. The water is scarce in this region. It is located on the crossroads of 2 important routes. On the one hand, the incense route coming from the Arabian Peninsula. Scents like incense and myrrh, but also other projects, for example, Indian spices, were traded towards the Mediterranean. This trade already started in the early 1st millennium BCE, and the Mediterraneans took over the trade somewhere in the Persian period likely. And in the 3rd century BCE, they further developed this route and set up several stopovers. Elusa likely was founded as one of the stopovers and is one of the last stopovers before reaching the Mediterranean ports. Most important, Gaza, but also Koura. While this trade stops in the first half of the 3rd century CE, it was for sure the motor of the early development of the city and the settlement of Elusa. Additionally, there are two major roads connecting Palestine with Egypt, one following the coast and one through the Negev. This second one is crossing Elusa and gets very important. Gets very important during the 4th century onwards, because the pilgrimage route towards Mount Sinai goes through it and may favor the Christian development of the city. Elusa is also, because of its location, located on the crossroad between two continents, Africa and Asia, and the Sinai Peninsula, and therefore at an area with many different cultural influences, not the least from the Mediterranean cultures. Elusa itself is positioned on a spur which is formed by the confluence of two wadis, the Nahal Besor, also called Wadi al-Khalaza, here on its west, and to its north and east, the Nahal Atadim, or Wadi al-Ausaya. This plateau and the area of the later city measure about 45 hectares. And the Nahal Besor is the largest stream in the Negev and has a lot of tributaries. Elusa itself, it's situated in some kind of basin formed by this wadi. One major factor on the establishment of the stopover and later the settlement at this site is for sure the easy accessibility of water, because groundwater aquifer is located only 3 meters below the bed of the wadi, and easily accessible with shallow wells from the slopes of the wadi. Important to notice that while most of the Negev settlements remained on a proto-urban state of development, Elusa is the only settlement in the whole region to develop further and feature real urban features. For example, it's the only settlement featuring an advanced public building like a theater. Here we see a photo taken in 1998. In 2005, this one was recovered. At the moment, the site was established as part of the UNESCO World Heritage Incense Road to better preserve it. Anyway, Elusa got to be the center of the Negev region. Cultural, as proven by the Big Bath House, the theater, and the well-known School of Rhetoric from written sources. Religious, as noted, it's noted as pagan center before getting Christianized, and later on featuring at least 7 churches and a bishop from the 4th century onwards. And administrative, being a place of a local court, as indicated by written sources, and being the capital of the region and becoming at least the practical capital of the region. And maybe even taking Petra's function as capital at some point in time. But that is rather vague and due to limited resources and an ongoing discussion in the research. The population of the city is estimated between 3,500 and 20,000 people, while we from Cologne assume it's around 8,000 to 10,000 people living inside the city. Just a few words onto the research history of the site. In April 1838, Elusa was visited by the American biblical scholar Edward Robinson, who identified the city the first time for Western scholarship. In the following years, it was often visited by different scholars and travelers, before in 1914 the first real investigation started, and Leonard Woolley and Thomas Edward Lawrence stayed there a few days and drew the first map of the city. More of a line out, we see it on the left. The first excavations were conducted in 1938 by Colleen Bailey as part of the Cold Earth expedition. But due to the rather late dating of the pottery found, they decided against continuing here and moved onwards to research on Shifter and Nitzana. The most important research achievements on the city can be attributed to the surveys and excavations of Abraham Negev, which he conducted between 1979 and 1990. He excavated the supposed cathedral of the city, its theater, some water reservoirs, and private buildings. But unfortunately, he only published his findings in very preliminary reports. That might also the reason be for a follow-up project of the Ben Gurion University under the direction of Hein Bolthus and Peter Fabian, which started in 1997 and was ongoing until 2000. We're investigating both the East Church, the so-called East Church, and the theater, and excavating a pottery workshop south of the city. Unfortunately, this was also only published in preliminary reports. More recent excavations were conducted by a team of the University of Haifa under the direction of Guy Baos, and followed an archaeobotanical approach with small trenches inside the big waste mounds of the city. I will talk about them later on in more detail. Now we are finally at the point the University of Cologne got involved. The Elusa project was initiated by my supervisor, Professor Michael Heinzelmann, in a close cooperation with the local Israel Antiquities Authority. And since 2017, I was privileged enough to be the manager of this project. Our primary goal, our primarily local cooperation partner is Tali Alexandrini. Since 2015, we are now excavating and trying to do a comprehensive multi-method task on site on the city, and trying to understand its basic chronology, its settlement history, and its role. In 2018, a sub-project started, because the urban survey was finished, and we for the first time went outwards of the city and were starting to investigate the surroundings. The Elusa Hinterland survey was born as a sub-project. Also in 2018, another sub-project started. The Department for Christian Archaeology of the University of Bonn joined, and they are concerned with the sacral topography of the city, investigating its churches and supposed monastery. This one is directed by Professor Sabine Schrenk and managed by Florian Jordan, who is doing his PhD on those churches and the sacral topography. Many students, mostly of those named universities, took place in the excavations and the survey work, and it was financed by the German Research Foundation, the German Israeli Foundation, and the Gerda Henkel Stiftung. The modern surface of Elusa is relatively barren and devoid of most of the rubble other Negev towns are still covered with. Here, for example, Rehovot in comparison. That is due to a heavy spoliation. Building material was brought to build Gaza in the end of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century. But not only there, but also, for example, to Beersheba. Al-Khalaza, the Arabic name of the city, even got to be some kind of trademark of high quality building stones, so many they took there. This barren appearance maybe disencouraged many researchers later on, and maybe the reason why other Negev settlements were focused instead of Elusa. But today it features a good accessibility for archaeological investigations. For example, a geophysical approach. First step was a trial of different geophysical methods. I won't name all of them now. But as is often the case, magnetometry proved to be a good balance between good results and doing it in a timely manner. And we mapped the whole city with this method, and here we see a preliminary drawing of the new city map. The final one is still in work. Additionally, we conducted an urban survey, and there we decided against doing a pottery survey and decided to search for indicator materials. So we measured the survey scatter of certain things to get insights into the functionality of certain buildings or areas. For example, if there's a scatter of glass tesserae and normal mosaic tesserae, tile fragments and marble fragments, it's a good indication that there's a church nearby. And in combination with the result of the geophysics, we were very well able to pinpoint those locations. And now we could prove to be 7 churches and 2 more candidates which are not as well, there's not as well evidence for it. Interesting enough, it seems that only churches feature tiled roofs in the city. All the other buildings seem to have flat roofs. Here we see Basilica B as an example with some related finds. Another approach was a geochemical soil sampling. The idea is that the concentration of certain elements and the combination in the surface can also indicate areas of certain functionality and may reveal, for example, workshops, kilns, or areas of waste disposal. This works rather good, and Arne Schröder did his master thesis on this method and processed the data for it. And also this method is still ongoing. With this combination of methodology, we could identify many areas of functionality inside the city. For example, the churches are marked red here. A big public building is the bathhouse in the north, marked blue, or the theater in the south, also marked blue. Then we did targeted small-scale excavations to gather chronological informations. And we did 32 trenches. We and the University of Bonn worked together. And we revealed a lot of nice public buildings, for example, the bathhouse. I just don't have the time to go very much into this, but the preservation of many buildings is very substantial. On average, we have like 2 meters of preserved wall. In case of the bathhouse, we had up to 6 meters of standing structures, including the foundations, but still it's impressive how much substance is still underneath the surface despite the heavy spoliation. Another example of finds is 2 sondages which investigated a small square in the northern part of the city. And actually we have a concentration of public buildings. The bathhouse, which is marked blue, right north of it, and to both the west and the southwest, there are 2 adjacent churches. Here we found 3 bases for statues and also 2 fragmented inscriptions. Those are very special because, or the right one is very special because it's the first find from the site itself naming the city Elusa. I would like to speak about much more and the results of all 32 trenches, but very important are streets. Half our sondage were targeting streets because they give them the best idea of the chronological layout of the city, and we positioned them all over the site. And at some places, and most places, we had a stratigraphy of about 4.5 meters, ranging from the bedrock or the virgin sand up until the modern surface, and featuring at some places up to 30 layers of occupation on top of each other. And we were able to calculate them to be renewed about every 25 years. Mid-5th century, this renewal of layers is stopped because in the whole city was a very neatly pavement done and established. At one place, we found dipinti on many of the on the slabs, maybe indicating some kind of accounting for it. Some streets featured porticos, which is another indication for the urban character of the city. A very special find was the inscription from Sondage 2. I had the luck to find myself. It mentions the personal doctor of the emperor donating this portico, and it's rather well preserved. As a short summary of the urban settlement history, we have possible early layers of use, maybe pre-Nabatean, maybe early Nabatean, from the Persian period, 6th to 4th century. But it's very vague in our data. But cold expeditions, so Colin Bailey noted some Persian material he found, especially in the north of the site. For sure, maybe already in the 4th century, for sure in the 3rd century, there was a scavenging stopover established, and we have some kind of campsites found related to this. So post holes, very simple fireplaces, and so on. Maybe in the 1st century BCE, there was a Hasmonean conquest, at least of the coast, maybe also including Elusa. That is not very clear. But we don't have any layers of use from this period, so there might have been a settlement hiatus in this time. But then, starting in 30 BCE and mostly in the 1st century CE, there's a second Nabatean expansion, and then there's suddenly a real settlement established, buildings, streets, already occupying the complete area of the later city, which is later on only getting denser and denser. In the 2nd century, and maybe correlating with the Romans taking control of the region, we have clear indications for urbanization. The big public buildings like the Bathhouse and the theater is built. The small square, which may be interpreted as a forum, is established. After some indications for crisis in the 3rd century BC, maybe related to an abrupt stop of the trade activity. From the 1st century onwards, we can clearly see a heyday of the settlement with monumental expansion, really big private and public buildings, and now churches come into view, and the Christianization is very evident. From the mid-6th century, we have some different crises, for example, plagues, earthquakes, droughts, which may be the case that this started the decline of the city, as indicated by the abandonment of some of the private buildings. The Arab conquest in the 630s already found the site, as a settlement, but maybe it already had lost its urban character. In this time, we have clear evidence for some kind of ruralization. Suddenly, we have, for example, agricultural installations like wine presses found inside the city, established inside the streets. And finally, the last indications for activity, a few dozen early Abbasid churches, noting the very last activity in the area of the site, which may be related to very heavy spoliation of the churches and the bathhouse, robbing out the marble, especially, and other building material. Now venturing outside of the inner city area, another approach is on the waste mounds, which form a belt around the city. Those are quite massive, up to 12 meters in high, and just huge piles of pottery, ashes, and building material. And not only targeted by the excavation I mentioned by Guy Baus and the University of Haifa. Also, we did some investigations on it. And here we see Diana Wozniak. She's some kind of my sister in crime, because she's the other PhD project candidate from Cologne, working also on Elusa. She's mainly concerned with ancient waste management and takes Elusa as one of her example sites. She did those corings and has really interesting results related to it. One important aspect for my work is the crossing, because she's also concerned with manuring or evidence for manuring. In the waste dumps, there is no evidence for a lot of biological wastes. Those seem to have been separated and brought into the hinterland. More on this later on. The next belt beyond that is the extensive necropolises of the city. This is a personal pet project of my supervisor, who personally surveyed over 8,600 individual burials in the area. And two of those we did trial excavations on. Likely many of them were originally marked with some kind of tombstones. One example we found during the Hinterland survey seen on the left. And all of them are covered with this wadi pebbles. Underneath is some sand, and then comes a kist with the inhumation. Okay, now we are finally coming to the second part of the lecture, investigating the hinterland. But first, I'd like to give a short overview of the research on the Negev region. Ellsworth Huntington published in 1911 his travel report on the region. And he's the first one to notice a stark difference between the modern arid environment and the many indications for ancient civilization in the region. And this sparked an ongoing research interest in both the climate of the region and the local archaeological remains. And especially since the 1960s, there were a lot of investigations concerning the towns and settlements of the Negev highlands, here roughly marked with this red box. Those led, for example, to the after farm experiments done by Michael Evenari. And the Negev highlands are very well researched, and up to this day, the research interest is still ongoing, as recent investigations of the surroundings of Shifter, Rehovot, or Sardon prove. They have one detail in common, runoff farming. Wherever there's a hilly in their vicinity is hilly terrain, and that was used to, the surfaces were prepared to lead runoff farming into the valleys, and in terraces inside the wadis, and the actual farming did take place. But while the Negev highlands are very well investigated, and there's a lot of accumulated information and knowledge about this, the lower parts of the region are not well investigated. Here we see a screenshot of the Archaeological Survey of Israel website, which is very well visualizing that one. The highlands here marked are mostly marked in purple and green, indicating published survey data of this region. Meanwhile, the lower parts I will be calling here lowlands, because there's not really an established designator for this region. And I would be happy if somebody could point me to a good one. But for now, just in contrast to the highlands, I will call them lowlands. Are mostly marked white, and that means that they're not surveyed. And in my area of research, there was only one wine press excavated by Gabi Mazor in 1973. That's part of the Abraham Negev excavations. And as such, the whole area can more or less seen as a blank space on our archaeological maps. This puts me or brings me to this very well or very nice citation of Nelson Glick. A blank space on a historical map is a constant challenge to the explorer and archaeologist. Its emptiness disturbs him. What role, if any, did it play in the development of civilization? Pardon me for a second. Now, we are finally coming to the actual Elusa Hinterland project. This investigation was thought to be part of my PhD project concerned with the settlement history and economic history of the city and its hinterland. But over the years, the Hinterland survey had become an increasing part of the whole project. My main questions are, how could a settlement develop to a city despite its location in this arid environment? What were the factors leading to the high level of prosperity of the city? And what is this prosperity based on? After finishing the urban survey in 2018, we for the first time ventured outside of the urban area and noted many, many structures in the hinterland. And the idea for the sub-project was born. Over the years, a total of 8 survey campaigns were conducted. Many of the sites appear as white hillocks. Those are often collapsed buildings forming the small hillock, which is covered in eroded building material. The local milestone used for the buildings is very wide and very soft and easily erodes to fine sand or small chippings. And those are very well visible, especially in comparison with the rather brown local soil or the rather orange sand coming from the Sinai. This gave the chance to do a remote sensing of available aerial and satellite images to mark those structures. A point of interest, a POI, are defined as an anomaly in the available data, be it satellite or aerial photos or inside the digital surface models I have available, which are pointing towards the structure. And in some cases, it didn't work well. For example, here in this Google Earth image, we see a very slight soil mark, which did not prove to be a site while working in field. But on the right side, we see another one in an aerial photo from the OFAC company from 2012, which proved to be a site, in this case, site 56. And there are many of those sites. For example, here we see a village, site number 6, which is very well visible both in aerial photos, modern, and in the digital surface model as an anomaly. In total, this led to a very high number of potential sites in the vicinity of the city, and I marked way over 500 POIs. And in this shown area of about 10 by 10 square kilometers, 494 of those POIs are situated. Here we see a preliminary result of the first few campaigns. In blue is the area marked we had investigated up to this point, including the urban survey. And many sites were identified. Here marked with those white triangles. I hope it's not too small. And many agricultural walls were found on the surface. In the beginning, we worked in small teams of 4 to 5 people and scanned those desert systematically, walking based on GPS coordinates in close proximity to each other and 5-meter distance. Against expectation, we found nearly no additional sites apart from those already marked as points of interest. Only exceptions were very small structures, like, for example, cistern openings, which were just too small to identify them in the aerial photos. Therefore, we later on changed the survey strategy, and continued to do a more mobile approach, driving directly to the points of interest. But still, we did we moved very systematically over the whole terrain to check for additional signs, but nearly none were found. How did I define a site? A site, short SI, indication for an artificial building structure, excluding agricultural field boundary walls. Any wall we found were documented separately and recorded separately. Building is in brackets because sometimes we have artificial features like the negatives of quarrying of building material in the quarries, which is not really a building, but still an artificial structure, and I defined it as also as a site. The Elusa hinterland features exceptional conditions for fieldwork. In contrast to most of the Mediterranean, this area is nearly untouched by modern plows, and the only areas with modern agriculture are marked here in brown. Additionally, there's some modern settlement marked here in purple. Additionally, most of the site of the area of investigation, around 80%, is part of one of 2 modern military training grounds of the IDFs. And in those firing zones, they are blessing and a curse at the same time. On the one hand, they are limiting the access well, they are limiting the access to the area, which is good because it prevented people building there and farm work and so on. But it always also limited our access because we only could work on weekends and during, for example, long holiday seasons like Pesach or also, except from some dense bushes and trees growing here in the, let's say, northern part of Wadi Besor, the vegetation on the surface is very sparse, and it's more or less area covered with small bushes, and so the access for surveying work and remote sensing is very good. Despite this modern influences onto the research area, an additional form of modern land use we often came along were many recent small-scale farming establishments of the local population. We found several dozen of those. Here's just a little footnote without much of an influence onto the ancient remains. But apparently several of those ancient farm sites are watered with ancient well water up to date. And in one tomb, we found a drying establishment for those products. Well, speaking of the area of investigation, after the initial campaigns focusing on the southwestern plain of the city, it was time to really define the final area of investigation. It was decided that a 5-kilometer radius around the city would be a good, would give a good insight into this microregion without being too gigantic. Still, that's an area of about 78 square kilometers, and therefore it's too much to be investigated in full detail. Therefore, 5 sub-areas were defined. First is a suburban circle in the middle with a radius of 1.5 kilometers. In this area, the city itself lies. It's a belt of waste mounds, some areas of horticulture, and and the necropolises. And it was mostly also already covered by the urban survey or the necropolis survey. Additionally, 4 transects with a width of 2 kilometers each were defined. Each was placed deliberately to cover a certain landscape to gather information on certain features and in the hope of recording different kinds of land use strategies in these areas. All 5 areas are approximately 715 hectares, which was thought to be of advantage for later evaluation and comparison of the findings. Transect A in the northeast, is dominated by the dunes of the Hinterland dune field. This area is the area with the lowest amount of points of interest and also lowest count of sites found, likely due to the strong sand cover today, but also because this dunes already existed in antiquity, and this area might have been not used as much for agriculture, or maybe more for, like, for example, for herding. Transect B in the southwest of the city was the initial survey area, and it features 2 large plains situated between the 4 major wadis, Wadi Besor and Wadi Atadim, both outside the transect on its east and west. So this one and this one here. And 2 additional wadis, Wadi Iris, this one, and Wadi Revivim, which goes like this, inside this transect. In its east, some parts of the Hinterland dune field are also situated. And here we have the only modern land use or substantial modern land use. Transect C is in south of Elusa. It features a transition from the more flat, not really plain, but only slightly undulated area next to the city, and the hilly area to the south, where, for example, Saradon and Rehoboth, 2 related settlements which are already investigated. are found. And in this area, we have the classical runoff farming and evidence for it, also like shown in this image here with this typical wadi terraces and preparation of the hills next to it. The northern half of it is formed by 3 large hills, and in between there are 2 tributary wadis forming a rather flat landscape with flat valleys. Last but not least, Transit D is a very large and sandy plain in a flat basin to the west of the city. In this area, which south is bordering to another dune field, the Cholat Elusa, and the other one was Cholat. Sorry, I confused them. Therefore, it's in parts a little bit sandy, but mostly it's a boshy plain. In this area, we had the highest level of destruction due to modern military training and heavy vehicles moving in the area. Coming to the results of the survey. The blue area marked here is the current area covered by the survey, and with the 8th survey campaign in 2023, the investigation of the transact was finally completed. Over 200 sites were found, with over half of them being those hillocks I named, which are mostly assumed to be very small-scale settlements, for example, singular farms or small farm complexes with only a few rooms. But there are also a few villages, like, for example, site 185 are already shown, and site 6, which is also a valley, and at least 2 additional hamlets. Additionally, we found many other features like tombs, tomb monuments, necropolises, wine presses, wells, and cisterns. The site distribution is relatively homogeneous and seems to be linked to its distance towards the city, with a higher density near the city and a decreasing density further one gets away. Interesting is the near absence of sites in the northeast of Transit A, and a comparatively low number here in Transit B. All sites were recorded using GNSS GPS. They were photographed, ground-based, and with a drone. The description was made, of course. Surface pottery was collected in a defined area. In some cases, we did a geophysical approach and measured the sites, but not as many as I would like. And in some cases, we did an SFM recording of the site to get some kind of small scale digital surface model of the area to get a better idea of the site. Due to the rather vague character of many sites, because most are just those white hillocks, there's some kind of considerations regarding the reliability of the identification needed. I therefore grouped them into 5 categories. A, the best one, where we found actual building structures and could record them in place. B, where we found architectural elements, for example, ashlars, capitals, or whatever, lying on the surface. C, where we had some kind of soil or vegetation mark indicating, for example, a rectangular structure or the line of the walls and additional building material rubble. Then the more vague ones, D, where we just found scattered building material, but no cut stones at all. And E, which is very vague with no indications apart from a special anomaly in the surface. And it's very nice that 81% of all sites are either featuring the actual building structure or have clear evidence for a collapse underneath mostly sand due to scattered ashlars and so on. And only 2 sites are of the lowest category. One example is here. We found it by chance. It's a weird sinkhole or erosion gully, which indicates a cavity underneath, and most likely there's some kind of cistern or well underneath, just covered with sediment, which was exposed due to heavy rainfall in the springtime. Speaking of springtime, many pictures I show are quite green because we nearly always worked in the wet season while the landscape was blooming. Most of the year it's very more beige and barren. Some information on chronological phases. Well, those are mostly dots on a map, but still, we have nearly no evidence for pre-Hellenistic activity. We just have one sherd of Iron Age and 4 sherds in total of Middle Bronze Age, despite processing a 6-digit count of pottery during the surveys. Then, with the Hellenistic, we have the first sites with a substantial amount of pottery, so we can date it to this. But those are very near to the city and may more represent the site halo or encampments in this area, in this early time. Sorry. In the Roman time, so from the in the first, second, and third century, we have more sites. In parallel with the establishment of the city or the settlement, we already, other way around. In the 1st century CE, we have the settlement, which later will become the city, and we have nearly no datings for sites falling in the early Roman period. So likely in this early phase, the settlement conducted the agriculture next to it itself, and the people from Haluza went outside. Starting with the Middle Roman, and especially in the Late Roman, suddenly we have many sites, and this may be related to the urbanization of the city, and and then the rural aspects stop inside the city, and we have specialized farms in the vicinity. The heyday in the 4th to 6th century is also very well represented in the datings from the sites, with 160 Byzantine sites in the surroundings and reaching further out. And starting with the early Islamic, mostly the Umayyad phases, we only have 15 sites left. So in this time, there's an abandonment of the area earlier than in the city. Why didn't we do a wide-scale pottery survey and try to identify the site halos similar to other Mediterranean survey projects? Well, that might have been possible. There's a slight increase in pottery density right next to the sites, but we have a widespread pottery survey in nearly the complete area of investigation. And there's a widespread pottery wherever there's no sand cover on top, you find those. And here are a few examples of the surfaces. And there's very evident there's a horizon and a veil of pottery, often in combination with a crusted surface. And we collected samples of over 100 1 by 1 meter square and to investigate this phenomenon. And there's a pottery density of up to 45 sherds per square meter, way more than at other places is related to manuring. The idea is that the biological household wastes were brought outside of the city, and by chance, sometimes pottery sherds were mixed into them, and they're brought onto the fields to use a very good löss, which we have in this area, to form with this biological waste, good earth and soils for agriculture. And over the centuries, the pottery sherds accumulated in this areas. Yeah. Additionally, there were a few hundred agricultural wards recorded in situ during the survey. Also indicating that we have fields in those areas and further supporting the manuring hypothesis. Many more features we can identify in another kind of remote sensing, and that's this evaluation of historical aerial data photos, which prove to be a real treasure. They are periodically taken images taken by the Royal Air Force and later on by the IDF Air Force of the whole country. The praxis maybe originated in the British need to get good information on the regions they governed. And there's the telling that at some point they wanted to get an idea of the level of Bedouin population in the area. So, and they just did not cooperate and went to the population census. So the British government of Palestine decided to do aerial photos of the whole country and just count the tens. I don't really know if it's true that the aerial photos are related to the story, but or if that's the only reason that they took it, but I'm very happy for the existence of those images. There are many newer images too, but due to a high sand influx during the second half of the 20th century, sorry, the earlier images are more suitable. Here we see the difference between the modern sand cover and here's an example from a 1956 image. We have the same tree here, located here, and here the smaller dirt. And we have some kind of walls still or lineaments still visible in the older aerial photo, and today it's completely invisible. While the modern vegetation is scarce, old pictures taken during the fieldwork of the Abraham Negev expedition shows the desert without any scrubs and bushes, likely due to overuse of the landscape due to herding and firewood collecting during the first half of the 20th century and maybe even before in the 19th century. And this might have been a large factor in enabling a strong sand movement during the middle of the 20th century and obscuring many archaeological features. Today, there are bushes again, and likely the sand movement is again reduced. Here we have the same area we saw in the 1956 aerial photo in another one from 1945. And many structures are visible. Here I marked them colored. We have one potential site with an enclosure wall and some buildings inside, and many lines which may indicate walls. Most of the time, not the actual walls are visible, but only vegetational marks or soil marks. Here's another good example of agriculture northwest of the city. And another example for very well visible building remains. I have evaluated aerial photos from 1945, 1956, the modern digital surface models, and satellite images for the whole area of investigation. The result is this map featuring over 8,000 lineaments. And one must be careful. On the one hand, those are lineaments. They may often relate to walls, but that might not always be true. Furthermore, alone based on the number of identified objects, the chance that there are false positives or mistakes are made is very high. But and there are some influence of modern activity related to the modern village of Al-Khalasa, which was situated in the first half of the 20th century after establishment in or shortly after the First World War, with some modern fields, but those are very few hectares directly next to Elusa. So in this area here and this part. Based on this existing lines, I added some supplementary lines to complete visible features and close obvious gap in the map lineaments, coming to these results. Adding the recorded sites, it is apparent that they are clearly related to the agricultural field systems. Often their layout is visible. Also, they clearly are in positions which are in direct connection to the adjacent fields. Therefore, I'm confident that we see here an ancient agriculture. And due to, we have modern finds for especially shards of the Black Gaza ware, but those are very limited and most likely only related to later herding in the areas, because up until today, the herders very much like to sit on the small hills and watching their herds. Additionally, I identified about 120 additional remote survey sites which must also feature visible structures and ideally also a verifiable anomaly in the modern digital surface models. But what are they producing here? We have found 21 wine presses in the surface areas. Some of them are not very reliable identifications without excavation, but still they have a relatively large number. The full ones are secure identifications, and the one with the white triangle are not so sure identifications of wine presses. This is a relatively large number, especially in comparison to the Negev highlands. John Seligman, for example, speaks of about only 12 wine presses for the whole Negev highlands in this 2020 paper. I'm rather sure there are more, but still there's a significant wine production ongoing in the hinterland, and we can see this as evidence that there's a larger wine production ongoing as needed for the subsistence of the city. This whole statement should be taken with caution. While the wine presses have been recorded and are mostly not well visible, and the extent and scale is mostly unknown, and only excavations could gather the related data, but still we have some indications. Wine has a special significance in the ongoing research on the region. We know from finds scattered across the whole Mediterranean and even in modern-day Britain and Germany that the Gaza wine, named after its main trade port at the Mediterranean Sea, was traded very far. Additionally, it's mentioned in ancient sources. For example, there's an anecdote that the bishop of Alexandria was very unhappy about his priest using this wine for the mass, indicating that it was a luxury item. But the exact origin of the Gaza wine is unclear. Was it produced in the coastal areas around Gaza, or were the Negev highlands providers of this wine? John Seligman, in a paper from 2020, pointed out that there's a discrepancy between the importance researchers are giving to the Negev highlands and their productions of the Gaza wine, and rather scarce evidence of it. And while this article has its flaws, the basic idea is very good. And new excavations in Yafne found a very substantial, large-scale wine press area, or several of those, including nearby pottery workshops delivering the related pottery. So there's good evidence for a large-scale production at the coast. And Elusa and its hinterland is right in between the highlands and those coastal areas. And well, I don't know how big was the part Elusa took place. But the high number of wine presses may point towards that wine was not only for local consumption, but also functioned as a cash crop and was traded outside. Yeah. The next part is very new and not yet refined. In the last days, I noticed that there are certain anomalies in the historical aerial photos. There are many squares or rectangulars, about 35 or 40 meters in diameter, some a little bit longer, for example, this one. And they often can be identified not too far away from other structures or buildings, but they are separate. And instead, or in contrast to those buildings, they don't form a hillock visible in the digital surface model. So they can't really be a collapsed building. And my current vague idea or hypothesis is that they could be proved to be threshing floors and or areas to process the harvest. And as Roy Marum was kind enough to point me that there are very comparable structures in the more recent agriculture in the region. If we map them, it's interesting enough that they're located in areas where we don't have as many wine presses, and they tend to be neighboring mostly those long stretched fields, which might be related to plowing. While the idea of identifying them as threshing floor is new and not very well refined yet, and this might be proven wrong in the ongoing evaluation of the data. And in this case, I'm very happy about any input on our commentary regarding those structures. Especially for some comparable data, I was very happy to point me in this direction. So how was this wide-scale agriculture possible? One answer could be that well water was used extensively. There are many indications for both systems and wells in the area, or we found them, and especially the wells are interesting. One very notable detail was provided by Amnon Bustan, a researcher of the Ramat Negev Agro Research Center. He pointed out that the vine roots can reach a depth of 10 meters and more, or 10 meters in the first year already. So after 1 year of manual watering the plants, they could reach the groundwater aquifer and maybe persisted on their own and being self-sufficient. Okay, now a short summary. There's a close interrelation between the development of both the city and the hinterland, with the settlement established in the 1st century, and in this time there is no real site in the surroundings, but from the 2nd century onwards with urbanization, suddenly we have a lot. We have the heyday both in the city and in the hinterland from the 4th to mid-6th century, and afterwards a decline, and hiatus after around 7050 CE. A little bit earlier in the hinterland, and where we don't found any epicid sherds, and a little bit later in the city where we found evidence for epicid activity. The prosperity of the city is, of course, evident in the intensive building activity and the many public buildings we found and our predecessors found. The city provides craftsmen's products. Oh, I forgot to mention this, but we found many pottery workshops in the area of the city, and the one excavated by Hein Goldfuß is also evidence of this. So likely the city provided materials, tools, and pottery for the surrounding sites. We have a near complete use of the landscape evident despite the arid environment. And on most of the area, the traditional runoff farming is impossible due to missing slopes, making it possible. And there are clear differences in land use depending on the landscape. So in total, the project enabled unique insights into the organization of the ancient agriculture of the region. And wine most likely functioned as a cash crop and is likely the catalyzer of the development at the heyday inside the city, because the cash flow enabled the people to construct those big buildings and the churches, in addition to the pilgrims which came and, of course, also left some money there. And maybe due to this threshing floors, grains may have also played a role in Elusa's economy. Okay. That concludes my presentation today. Thank you very much for your attention. This all was only possible to the help of my supervisor and all the students making the excavations and surveys possible. And well, I'm very happy to receive any comments and questions. Thank you very much.